The morning I discovered my husband of 45 years had been systematically emptying our accounts, I was standing in the garden he once claimed I loved more than him. After decades as a nurse, then as the backbone of our family business, I recognized the symptoms of betrayal before I saw the evidence. His marriage challenge journal sat open on the patio table beside bank statements showing transfers I'd never authorized. The pages detailed every improvement activity I'd completed while he was busy creating his exit strategy. They say wisdom comes with age, but sometimes so does betrayal from those we've trusted longest. What my husband called our marriage challenge was actually his escape plan. But he never expected I'd kept one crucial piece of advice from my mother: always have something of your own. The soil felt cool between my fingers as I nestled the last of the new roses into the garden bed. These autumn sunsets would bloom just in time for our 46th anniversary, if we made it that far. I brushed dirt from my gardening gloves and surveyed the space I'd cultivated as faithfully as my marriage. Every plant had its history: the hydrangeas from our first home, the lilacs Robert had given me when Michael was born, the herbs I'd used for family remedies throughout my nursing career. My phone rang. Lisa, our youngest, calling about her brother's birthday dinner. "Mom, how are you holding up?" she asked, concern evident even through the tinny speaker. My sister Margaret's funeral had been just 3 weeks ago. "I'm keeping busy," I said, the practiced response of someone who'd spent a lifetime caring for others. "The garden helps." "And Dad? Is he being supportive?" I hesitated. Robert had attended the funeral, stood beside me at the grave, but something had felt mechanical in his comfort. "He's trying in his own way." After we hung up, I gathered my tools and headed inside to prepare Robert's favorite meal. The dining room wall held our family's visual history: wedding photos, children's graduations, the grand opening of Hamilton Family Insurance. My nursing certificates hung beside Robert's business awards, a testament to our parallel journeys. I was sliding the casserole into the oven when I heard Robert's car in the driveway 2 hours earlier than expected. The front door opened, and he called my name with unusual enthusiasm. "Eleanor, are you home?" Something in his tone made me pause before answering. Robert stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a wrapped package and wearing what I'd come to think of as his client smile: charming, confident, and not quite reaching his eyes. "You're home early," I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "I wanted to surprise you." He gestured to the table. "Can we sit?" "I have something important to discuss." The dining room glowed with late afternoon sun as Robert placed the package between us. He'd chosen my favorite wine, poured 2 glasses with ceremonial precision. "I've been thinking about us, Eleanor, about our marriage." My stomach tightened. After 45 years, you develop instincts about conversations that begin this way. "We've been drifting," he continued. "Since your retirement, since the kids moved away, and now, with Margaret gone." He reached for my hand. "I'm worried about you, about us." "I didn't realize you were concerned," I said carefully. "That's exactly my point." Robert pushed the package toward me. "We're not communicating like we used to. That's why I've created this." Inside was a leather-bound journal embossed with "Our Marriage Challenge" and 2 smaller notebooks. "I've been reading about how couples rejuvenate their relationships," he explained, suddenly animated. "This is a 12-week program I've customized for us. Daily activities, weekly goals, complete transparency." He tapped the journal. "I think it could really help us reconnect before it's too late." The "too late" hung in the air between us. "Part of the process," he continued when I didn't immediately respond, "is financial transparency." I think we should combine our remaining separate accounts, streamline everything. No barriers between us. I studied his face, the face I'd woken up beside for nearly half a century. Something felt rehearsed about this sudden concern, this perfectly packaged solution. "It's thoughtful," I said finally. "Though the timing, with Margaret the timing is exactly why we need this," he interrupted. "Grief can either pull couples apart or bring them together. I want us to grow closer through this, Eleanor." I nodded slowly, touched despite my reservations. Perhaps I was being unfair. Perhaps this was simply Robert's way of reaching out. "All right," I said. "Let's try your challenge." His smile widened as he reached for his wineglass. "You won't regret this." 2 days later, we sat at Robert's desk, setting up our transparent financial access. The leather chair creaked as he leaned forward, positioning the computer screen at an angle that made it difficult for me to see clearly. "So, we'll use a password system we'll both remember," he explained, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Anniversary dates, family birthdays, that sort of thing." I nodded, watching as he navigated through screens I'd never seen before. "What about my retirement account? Should I give you that password too?" "Absolutely. Complete transparency, remember?" He slid a notepad toward me. "Write down all your current passwords, and I'll make sure everything is integrated properly." I wrote down each one carefully while Robert continued clicking through screens. When I finished, he took the list with a quick glance. "Perfect. Now I'll set up the new system." He turned back to the computer, body slightly blocking my view. "Trust me, I'll handle all the technical details. You know how good I am with this stuff." I watched as he created what he called shared access profiles. Something about his efficiency made me uneasy, as though this plan had been developed long before our conversation. "There," he said finally. "All done. We now have complete financial transparency." He handed me a card with new passwords. "I've changed everything to our new system." "So I can access all our accounts with these?" I asked. "Of course," he said, standing up. "That's the whole point. I need to make a call. Why don't you try logging in while I step out?" After he left, I tried accessing our checking account using the new password. "Access denied" flashed on the screen. I tried again, thinking I'd made a typing error. Same result. The phone rang, startling me. It was Martha from church. "Eleanor, just checking in?" "You sounded a bit off at prayer group yesterday." "Did I?" I stared at the error message. "I suppose I'm still adjusting to life without Margaret." "Of course you are," Martha said gently. "How's Robert handling it?" "He's—" I paused, unsure how to articulate my vague unease. "He's actually started something called a marriage challenge to help us reconnect." "That sounds interesting," Martha said, her tone careful. "Is it helping?" "It's too soon to tell," I replied, watching the cursor blink on the error screen. "I should go, Martha. Dinner prep. But thank you for calling." After hanging up, I opened the desk drawer, searching for the original password list I'd given Robert. It wasn't there. Neither was the account statement I'd noticed earlier. I closed the drawer slowly, a chill settling over me despite the warm spring air drifting through the window. That night, I started keeping my own private notes about our marriage challenge. The house was silent at 5:30 a.m. as I settled at the kitchen table with my laptop. Robert wouldn't be awake for another hour. He'd always been a predictable sleeper. The marriage challenge calendar beside me showed a week of completed activities. Appreciation notes, shared meals, evening walks. I'd fulfilled each one diligently. I typed in the password Robert had given me for our joint checking account. Access denied. I tried our savings account. Access denied. The investment portfolio, access denied. My email chimed with a notification. Changes to your account settings. I hadn't made any changes. Another email arrived. New user added to Hamilton Financial Holdings. I didn't recognize the account name. A pattern was emerging. In the 3 weeks since beginning the challenge, I'd lost access to accounts I'd previously managed, while new accounts appeared that I couldn't view. All coinciding with Robert's sudden interest in marital improvement. I reached for Robert's jacket draped over the kitchen chair, something I'd never done before in 45 years of marriage. The inner pocket held a receipt from Lakeside Apartments, dated 2 days earlier. Application fee, $150, was circled in pen. We weren't looking for an apartment. I carefully returned the receipt and jacket exactly as I'd found them. By the time Robert came downstairs, I was making coffee as usual, the laptop closed, my face composed into what I hoped was a neutral expression. "Good morning," he said, kissing my cheek. "Ready for today's challenge activity? It's about rediscovering physical intimacy." I smiled and handed him his coffee. "Looking forward to it." The Riverside restaurant glittered with candlelight as we celebrated our 45th anniversary with the Wilsons and the Clarks, friends who'd known us since our children were small. I'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing a blue dress Robert had once complimented, styling my silver-streaked hair, applying light makeup, making an effort, as the challenge journal suggested. Robert ordered champagne for the table. "To 45 years," he toasted, his arm around my shoulders, "and to new beginnings." The conversation flowed pleasantly until dessert, when Susan Clark asked about our children. "Lisa's coming to visit next month," I said. "She's bringing the grandkids." "Wonderful," Susan smiled. "And how's the retirement going, Eleanor? Do you miss nursing?" Before I could answer, Robert interjected. "Eleanor's been adjusting. Actually, we've started something called a marriage challenge to help her find purpose again." I felt my smile freeze. "The challenge is helping Eleanor find herself again," he continued, his voice carrying slightly too loudly. "She's let herself go a bit since retiring. You know how it is when women lose their professional identity." A painful silence fell over the table. David Wilson studied his water glass. Susan's mouth tightened. "I think Eleanor looks lovely," Diane Wilson said firmly, squeezing my hand under the table. "And her volunteer work at the hospital is hardly letting herself go." Robert laughed, as if Diane had made a joke. Of course. I just meant that the challenge is good for both of us. Eleanor's always been so dedicated to everyone else. Now it's time she focuses on our marriage." The conversation shifted awkwardly to safer topics. In the ladies' room afterward, Diane followed me in. "That wasn't right, Eleanor," she said quietly. "Has he been talking to you that way at home?" "It's fine," I said automatically. "He's just enthusiastic about this marriage program." Diane studied me for a long moment. "You know where to find me if you need to talk." "About anything." The drive home passed in silence, Robert humming along to the radio while I watched his profile in the darkness. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was sitting beside a stranger. The following Tuesday, I spread tax documents across the home office desk. Our accountant needed last year's returns for a question about Robert's business deductions. As I reached behind the filing cabinet to access the older files, my fingers touched a folder I didn't recognize. Inside was a lease agreement for a one-bedroom apartment at Lakeside Apartments, dated to begin in 3 months, precisely when our marriage challenge would conclude. The applicant, Robert Hamilton. Status, pending final approval. I was still staring at the document when Robert walked in. "What are you looking at?" he asked, his tone sharpening when he saw the folder. I held up the lease agreement. I was looking for last year's tax returns. Found this instead. Something you want to tell me about Lakeside Apartments? Robert's face shifted, annoyance flickering before settling into a practiced calm. That's just business, Eleanor. We're considering expanding the agency to a second location. Nothing for you to worry about. The application lists you personally, not the business, I pointed out. He sighed with the exaggerated patience he'd been using more frequently. It's a preliminary step. Sometimes residential property is better for certain types of satellite offices. The tax advantages are different. He took the folder from my hands. This is why I handle the business matters. These details just confuse you. I'm not confused, Robert. I'm concerned. This lease begins right when our challenge ends. You're connecting dots that aren't related, he said, placing the folder in his desk drawer and locking it, something I'd never seen him do before. Have you been sleeping well? Since Margaret passed, you've seemed, I don't know, a bit paranoid. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Stevens about it. I'm sleeping fine, I said, standing up. I need to call James about these tax questions. I'll handle James, Robert said quickly. No need to bother yourself. That afternoon, I called our accountant anyway. James Peterson had handled our finances for 30 years. Eleanor, he said warmly, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? Just a quick question about last year's returns, I said, then hesitated. Actually, James, I was wondering if you've noticed any unusual activity in our accounts recently. The pause that followed was brief but telling. Why don't you come by the office tomorrow? He suggested. Some things are better discussed in person. James's office was a comforting constant in a changing world, the same worn leather chairs, the familiar smell of coffee and paper, the wall of professional certifications that had grown over 3 decades. James himself had aged well, his steady reliability reflected in meticulous record-keeping and ethical precision. Eleanor, he said, closing his office door after his assistant brought coffee. I've been hoping you'd call. He turned his computer monitor so we could both see it. I've noticed some concerning patterns in your accounts over the past month. The screen showed a series of transactions I'd never authorized. Transfers from our joint retirement account to new accounts under only Robert's name, investment liquidations, and applications for lines of credit using our home as collateral. These aren't normal account adjustments, James said carefully. And they all began shortly after your sister's passing. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my coffee cup. How much has been moved? Nearly 40% of your liquid assets, James replied, with pending transactions for another 15%. He pulled up another screen showing a pattern of withdrawals, each occurring the day after I'd signed one of the challenge commitment documents Robert had created. When you signed the financial transparency agreement, James continued, did you understand it gave Robert authority to make these changes? I felt a cold weight settling in my chest. I thought we were combining accounts for better management, not this. James nodded, his expression grave. I have to be careful about making accusations, Eleanor, but professionally speaking, I'm concerned. These patterns aren't consistent with joint financial planning. They're consistent with someone planning to leave, I said quietly. I would advise you to protect yourself, James said, handing me a folder. I've documented everything, and perhaps you should speak with a family law attorney. As I left his office, the bright spring sunshine felt like a mockery of the darkness spreading through my life. That night, long after Robert had gone to bed, I sat at his desk, staring at his carelessly unlocked computer. In 45 years, I had never invaded my husband's privacy this way. But then, in 45 years, He had never given me reason to. I clicked on his email, hesitating only briefly before typing "challenge" in the search bar. Several threads appeared, including one with the subject line, "Post-Challenge Exit Plan." The recipient was Gerald Hoffman, Robert's attorney. My heart pounding, I opened the thread. "Gerald, as discussed, I need the exit strategy finalized before the challenge concludes in July. Eleanor has been compliant with all the financial consolidation steps, signing everything without question, which makes our position stronger. The apartment application is pending, but I've secured temporary housing if needed. I've documented what could be interpreted as memory issues to establish grounds for reduced capacity if she becomes difficult. I need clarity on how her current cooperation affects later claims. Can she argue she didn't understand what she was signing? The challenge provides perfect cover, but I want to ensure it's legally sound. Robert." The reply was equally clinical. "Robert, your documentation of her declining capacity creates legal advantage. Continue collecting examples of confusion or memory issues. The signed financial documents create a strong presumption of consent. Timing the divorce filing immediately after the challenge ends is strategic. It demonstrates you made good faith efforts to save the marriage. I'll have everything prepared for July. Gerald." I printed the entire thread with shaking hands, then carefully returned the computer to its previous state. In our bedroom, Robert slept peacefully, his breathing deep and regular. I stood in the doorway watching him, this man I'd built a life with, who was now systematically dismantling it. I didn't cry. Something had crystallized inside me, harder and colder than tears. Michael's office at Hamilton Family Insurance was smaller than his father's, but decorated with the same attention to appearance, certificates prominently displayed, family photos arranged to convey stability and success. My son looked startled when I appeared in his doorway. "Mom, is everything okay? Did we have lunch plans?" "No plans," I said, closing the door behind me. "I was hoping we could talk." Michael's eyes darted to his phone. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. This won't take long." I sat in the client chair across from him. "I'm concerned about some changes in the family accounts. Large transfers, new holdings I can't access." Michael shuffled papers on his desk. "Dad handles all that. You know I'm not involved in your personal finances." "But you are involved in the business finances," I pressed. "And some of these transfers are moving through business accounts. Mom, seriously, you need to talk to Dad about this." His discomfort was palpable. I studied my son's face, so like Robert's, down to the way he avoided eye contact when uncomfortable. "How long have you known about your father's plans, Michael?" The question hung between us. Michael's fingers tapped nervously on his desk. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. "I think you do." I placed a printout of one email on his desk, one that mentioned Michael's awareness of the transition plan. "Your father is moving assets, preparing for divorce, while pretending to work on our marriage." Michael's face flushed. He said it was just a contingency, that he was protecting the business in case things didn't work out. "And you believed that was ethical? To help him hide this from me?" "He's my father, Mom. My boss." Michael's voice held a plea for understanding. "He said you'd been difficult, emotional, since Aunt Margaret died." "I raised you better than this," I said quietly, standing up. "When your father asks, tell him I stopped by to invite you to dinner. Nothing else." As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know the whole story." Too little, too late. I sat in the parking lot, watching the insurance agency Robert and I had built together, the sign we'd proudly unveiled 20 years ago. The business that had paid for our children's education, our comfortable retirement, our future. A future Robert had been systematically separating from mine. Enough, I thought, starting the car. This ends now. The small desk in my sewing room had been my mother's. Its narrow drawers held mementos I rarely examined: birthday cards, old photos, the odds and ends of a long life. The bottom drawer stuck slightly as I pulled it open, revealing a wooden box containing my mother's letters. I found what I was looking for near the bottom: an envelope dated 3 years after Robert and I married. Inside was a bank book and a handwritten note. My dearest Eleanor, a woman should always have something of her own. Your father was a good man, but his death taught me how vulnerable we become when we entrust everything to someone else. I've opened this account in your name. Add to it when you can, even small amounts. Consider it insurance, not against Robert, but against life's uncertainties. With love, Mother. I'd followed her advice, depositing small amounts over decades: birthday checks, minor inheritances, the occasional nursing shift I'd picked up after retirement. I'd almost forgotten about it until now. The most recent statement showed a balance that took my breath away. My mother's original deposit had been modest, but the investment option she'd selected had performed remarkably well. With compound interest and my occasional additions, the account now held enough to support me for several years if necessary. A resource Robert knew nothing about. A safety net my mother had insisted upon, even when I'd thought it unnecessary. I sat back in my chair, a small smile forming. This changed everything. With financial independence, I could approach the situation strategically rather than desperately. I could make choices based on justice rather than fear. That evening, I called Martha from church. Remember when you mentioned your background in family law? I think I need your advice. Martha's home office reflected her dual identities: legal certificates, shared wall space with family photos and church service awards. Though retired from active practice, she'd maintained her license and occasionally advised friends in difficult situations. "Eleanor," she said, pouring tea into delicate cups that contrasted with her no-nonsense demeanor, "tell me everything." I laid out the evidence chronologically: the marriage challenge, the changed passwords, the discovery of Robert's apartment lease, James's financial documentation, and finally, the damning emails. Martha took meticulous notes, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "This is textbook financial exploitation," she said finally, "made more egregious by the manipulation of your grief over Margaret to implement it." "What are my options?" I asked. "Legally, we can pursue several avenues," Martha explained, shifting into professional mode. "First, we need to secure emergency protective orders for your major assets. James's documentation is crucial here. It establishes a pattern of exploitation." She outlined a 3-phase approach: immediate asset protection, documentation of Robert's deception, and strategic confrontation. "The marriage challenge actually works in your favor," Martha noted. "It demonstrates your good faith efforts while documenting his manipulation. Each activity he created provides evidence of premeditation." "What about the claims of my declining capacity?" I asked. "That's particularly concerning," Martha admitted. "He's laying groundwork to question your competence. We should consider having you evaluated by an independent physician to establish a clear baseline." She studied me over her glasses. "Eleanor, this isn't just unethical. Parts of what he's doing could be illegal, especially if he's using coercion to obtain signatures or misrepresenting documents." "I never thought I'd be discussing my husband in these terms," I said quietly. Martha reached across the table to squeeze my hand. The Robert you knew for 40 years, and the Robert who's doing this now, might not be the same person. People change, sometimes not for the better. What's my next step? I asked. Continue documenting everything while we prepare legal protections. And Eleanor, Martha's expression softened, don't face him alone until we have safeguards in place. The conference room at Peterson Accounting was discreetly tucked away from the main office, offering privacy for sensitive discussions. James arrived with 3 thick folders and a recording device. I hope you don't mind, he said, indicating the recorder. Given the nature of what we're discussing, I think it's wise to maintain clear records. I nodded my agreement as he arranged documents on the table. I've been tracking the concerning patterns we discussed, James began. And I've prepared comprehensive documentation of all transactions since the challenge began. The first folder contained chronological records of every account change, transfer, and new account opening, annotated with relevant dates from the marriage challenge timeline I'd provided. The correlation is unmistakable, James explained. Each significant financial move occurs immediately after you've signed one of Robert's transparency documents. The second folder held copies of the original account agreements, highlighting the discrepancies between what I believed I was signing and the actual authorizations. As your accountant for 30 years, I have ethical obligations, James said gravely. What I'm seeing constitutes potential financial exploitation of a spouse, which creates reporting responsibilities. What does that mean? I asked. It means I'm obligated to document my concerns officially, he replied. I can submit these records to the relevant financial authorities if you authorize me to do so. Would that alert Robert? Not immediately, James assured me, but it creates an official record that can help protect your assets. The third folder contained a detailed action plan with timelines for securing accounts, requesting fraud alerts, and implementing financial safeguards. We need to move quickly, James advised. Based on the pattern of transfers, Robert appears to be accelerating his timeline. We spent the next hour finalizing the protection strategy, coordinating with Martha's legal approach, and establishing communication protocols. Eleanor, James said as we concluded, I want you to know that my decision to document these concerns wasn't just professional. In 30 years, I've never seen Robert behave this way. Something has changed, and I couldn't in good conscience remain silent. As I gathered the folders, I felt a curious sense of calm, replacing the shock and hurt. With James and Martha's help, I was no longer facing Robert's betrayal alone. I had evidence, expertise, and a plan. We'll implement the first protective measures tomorrow, James confirmed. Are you ready? I nodded. More than ready. The Regional Community Bank's conference room felt appropriately formal for what we were about to do. James sat beside me, his briefcase open to reveal meticulously organized documentation. Across the table, Miss Vargas, the bank's fraud protection officer, reviewed the records with growing concern. Mrs. Hamilton, she said finally, based on the pattern Mr. Peterson has documented, we can implement immediate protective measures on your joint accounts. What exactly does that mean? I asked. It means we'll place a temporary hold on major transactions pending investigation, she explained. No transfers over $1,000, no new loans using these assets as collateral, and no account structure changes without dual authorization. She slid a form across the table. This freezes the status of all accounts for 30 days while we investigate the concerning activity. It's a standard fraud protection measure. I signed where indicated, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the first concrete action I'd taken to protect myself, the first public acknowledgement that my husband of 45 years could not be trusted. What happens next? I asked. We'll notify all account holders of the temporary restrictions, Mr. Vargas explained. Our fraud team will review the transaction history and will reach out if we need additional information. So Robert will be notified immediately? Yes, as a joint account holder, he'll receive notification as soon as the protection is implemented, likely within the hour. James and I exchanged glances. We'd anticipated this, planned for it. Still, knowing Robert would soon discover my first countermove made my heart race. One more thing, Mrs. Vargas added, her expression softening slightly. Based on what I'm seeing here, I'd like to connect you with our elder financial protection specialist. Some of these patterns, well, they raise specific concerns. I'm not elderly, I said, more sharply than intended. I'm 68 and fully competent. Of course, she replied smoothly. The service is available to anyone over 65 dealing with potential financial exploitation. Age doesn't imply diminished capacity. As if on cue, my phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen. That was fast, James murmured. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Robert. Eleanor, what the hell is going on? His voice was tight with controlled anger. I just got a notification about account restrictions. Is this your doing? Yes, I said calmly. We can discuss it when you get home. I'm leaving the office now, he snapped before hanging up. I looked at James and Mr. Vargas. Phase 1 complete, now for the hard part. The living room was bathed in early evening light when Robert burst through the front door. I sat in my reading chair, a folder of documents on my lap, my posture deliberately calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. What have you done? He demanded, still wearing his suit from work, face flushed with anger. Have you lost your mind? I've protected our assets, I replied evenly. Temporarily. Protected them? From what? He paced the room, keys still clutched in his hand. You had no right to freeze our accounts. Interesting choice of words, I observed. Our accounts. Yet I haven't been able to access them for weeks. Robert stopped pacing, his expression shifting as he reassessed the situation. Is that what this is about? Access issues? Eleanor, if you were having trouble with the new system, you should have just said something. I did say something. You told me I was confused. Because you were. You've been emotional since Margaret died. Forgetful. That's why the challenge is so important, to help you focus. I opened the folder and removed the email printouts. Is that why you created it? To help me focus? Or was it, as you told Gerald Hoffman, to provide perfect cover while you prepared your exit? Robert's face drained of color. You went through my emails. That's invasion of privacy. Whereas systematically emptying our joint accounts while gaslighting me about my mental state is... What exactly? You don't understand, he said, changing tactics, his voice softening. I was just exploring options, contingency planning. Contingency planning that included an apartment lease, transfer of 40% of our assets to accounts in your name only, and documented examples of my supposed declining capacity. I laid out each piece of evidence as I spoke. That sort of contingency planning? Eleanor, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of Margaret's death. Stop. My voice was quiet, but firm. Stop using my sister's death as a weapon against me. James has documented every financial move you've made. Martha has reviewed all the legal implications. The bank is investigating potential fraud. This isn't just about me being emotional anymore, Robert. He stared at me, shock giving way to calculation. James and Martha are involved. You've been discussing our private matters with outsiders? They're not outsiders. They're professionals with ethical obligations who recognized exploitation when they saw it. Robert sank onto the sofa, reassessing his position. "I think we should talk to Dr. Stevens," he said finally, "about your paranoia. This isn't like you, Eleanor." "Actually," I replied, standing up for myself might be exactly like me. You've just never seen it before because you've never given me reason to." Dr. Stevens's office hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same soothing blue walls, medical diplomas alongside family photos, the slightly worn leather chairs where we'd received both routine reports and life-changing diagnoses over the decades. Robert had insisted on driving me, positioning himself as the concerned husband. He'd called ahead, I discovered, to discuss his worries about Eleanor's mental state. "So, Doctor," Stephen said, after initial greetings, "Robert tells me there have been some concerning behaviors recently, Eleanor." Robert leaned forward earnestly. "She's been confused, paranoid, making accusations, freezing our accounts. It started after her sister died, but it's getting worse." Dr. Stevens nodded, making notes. "Loss can trigger various responses. Eleanor, how would you describe what you've been experiencing?" Before I could answer, Robert interjected. "She's been having memory issues too, forgetting conversations, misplacing things." "I see," Dr. Stevens said neutrally. "Eleanor, would you mind if we spoke privately for a few minutes?" Robert's face tightened. "I think I should stay. She might not remember everything correctly." "Standard protocol with cognitive concerns," Dr. Stevens replied professionally. "I'll speak with you both together afterward." Reluctantly, Robert left the room. As the door closed, Dr. Stevens's expression softened. "Now, Eleanor." "What's really going on?" I handed him a slim folder containing select documents, the email exchanges, James's financial summary, and Martha's legal assessment. "My husband has been systematically preparing for divorce while pretending to work on our marriage," I explained, "including documenting supposed memory issues to strengthen his position." Dr. Stevens reviewed the materials, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is concerning, to say the least." "Robert suggested I might be developing dementia," I said. "I'd like a cognitive assessment, from you, not from a doctor of his choosing." Dr. Stevens nodded. A wise precaution. He conducted a thorough evaluation, documenting each result carefully. "Eleanor, your cognitive function is absolutely normal for your age. There's no clinical evidence of memory impairment or confusion." "Would you document that assessment?" "Already am," he replied, making detailed notes in my file. "I'm also noting concerns about potential elder abuse, which creates certain reporting obligations if you wish to pursue them." When Robert was invited back in, Dr. Stevens maintained his professional demeanor. "I've completed a thorough cognitive assessment," he informed us, directing his comments to both of us equally. "I'm pleased to report that Eleanor shows no clinical signs of cognitive impairment, memory loss, or confusion. Her mental faculties are completely normal for someone her age." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "But the behaviors I mentioned could be explained by many factors," Dr. Stevens interjected smoothly. "Grief is complex, and stress can manifest in ways that might appear concerning without actually indicating cognitive decline." He turned specifically to Robert. "I understand you've been worried, but I want to be clear. There is no medical evidence supporting concerns about Eleanor's capacity to make decisions or manage her affairs." "I see," Robert said stiffly. "In fact," Dr. Stevens continued, "I'd recommend reducing stressors rather than adding new challenges at this time." He glanced meaningfully at the marriage challenge journal Robert had insisted Eleanor bring. "Eleanor," Dr. Stevens added, I'd like to see you for a follow-up in 2 weeks, and I'd suggest consulting with a grief counselor who specializes in late-life transitions." As we left the office, Robert remained silent, his earlier solicitousness replaced with tight-lipped anger. In the car, he finally spoke. "This doesn't change anything, Eleanor. You're still acting irrationally with our finances." "Actually," I replied calmly, "it changes everything. You now have documentation from our family physician that contradicts your claims about my mental state." For the first time since I'd discovered his betrayal, I saw something like fear flash across Robert's face. Our dining room had hosted countless family gatherings, holiday meals, birthday celebrations, Sunday dinners. Now it held a different kind of family meeting. Our 3 children sat around the table, confusion and concern evident on their faces. Michael avoided my gaze. Lisa kept glancing anxiously at her father, and our middle child, Thomas, studied the folder I'd placed before each of them. Robert arrived last, stopping short in the doorway when he saw everyone gathered. "What's this?" he demanded. "A family discussion," I replied. "About the future. Please sit down." "I told you not to involve the children," he said tightly. "Actually, you involved Michael months ago," I corrected. "And since this affects everyone, they all deserve to know the truth." Thomas, always the most analytical of our children, had already started reviewing the documents. "Dad, what is this?" he asked, holding up a printout of the email to Gerald Hoffman. "Your mother is overreacting," Robert began, taking his seat reluctantly. "She found some preliminary consultations taken out of context." "These don't look like they're out of context," Lisa interrupted, her voice shaking slightly as she read. "This says you've been documenting Mom's supposed declining capacity while planning to divorce her." "It was contingency planning," Robert insisted. "Nothing was decided." "The apartment lease looks pretty decided," Thomas observed, "as do the account transfers." I remained calm as I laid out the timeline. The marriage challenge introduced right after Margaret's death, the systematic financial maneuvers, the consultations with lawyers about minimizing what I would receive. Meanwhile, I concluded, I was dutifully completing reconnection activities, believing we were working on our marriage. Robert's son-in-law, a corporate attorney, cleared his throat. "From a legal perspective, this documentation raises serious concerns. The pattern suggests deliberate misrepresentation and potential financial exploitation." "This is a private matter between your mother and me," Robert said, his voice hardening. "We should discuss this without an audience." "That's exactly what you've been counting on, isn't it?" I replied. "Privacy that allowed you to manipulate the narrative. That ends today." Lisa turned to her father, tears in her eyes. "How could you do this to Mom, after everything she's done for this family?" "You don't understand the pressures I've been under," Robert began, but the excuse sounded hollow even to him. "I think we understand perfectly," Thomas said. "You wanted out without paying the full financial price." Robert looked around the table, realizing he'd lost control of the situation and his carefully cultivated family image. "I need some air," he muttered, rising abruptly and leaving through the back door. In the silence that followed, Michael finally spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know how far he'd taken this." "We'll figure this out," Thomas assured me, reaching for my hand. "Together." For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting. The truth was, finally in the open. Sunday services at First Methodist had been part of our routine for 40 years. Robert and I had taught Sunday school, served on committees, celebrated our children's confirmations beneath its vaulted ceiling. Today I entered alone, conscious of the glances as I took my usual seat without Robert beside me. News travels quickly in close communities. Whispers had already begun about account freezes, family meetings, Robert staying at a hotel. I'd maintained my dignity, sharing minimal details, even with close friends. After the service, as congregation members gathered for coffee in the social hall, Diane Wilson made her way directly to me. "Eleanor," she said warmly, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "John and I wanted to let you know we're here for you, whatever you need." Pastor Thomas approached, his kind face serious. "Eleanor, how are you holding up?" "I'm taking one day at a time," I replied, the standard answer that revealed nothing. "Robert called me yesterday," the pastor continued. "He suggested you might be going through a difficult adjustment period." Diane's eyes flashed. "Is that what he's calling it?" Pastor Thomas glanced between us. "I offered to facilitate a conversation between you both, but he declined." "That doesn't surprise me," I said quietly. "Mediation requires honesty." More friends gathered around, church members who'd known us for decades. Susan Clark mentioned that Robert had been sharing concerns about my emotional stability for weeks. John Wilson confirmed that Robert had tried to enlist his support in a narrative about my supposed memory issues. "We've known you too long to believe that, Eleanor," John said firmly. "Anyone can see you're as sharp as ever." I shared only what was necessary, that Robert had been planning to leave while pretending to work on our marriage, and that financial protections had become necessary. I didn't mention the emails, the apartment, or the full scope of the deception. Some dignity should remain, even in betrayal. Across the room, I noticed newer church members who'd only known us as a couple, watching with curious eyes. Robert's absence was conspicuous, his carefully cultivated image as devoted husband beginning to crumble in the place where it had been most firmly established. Pastor Thomas squeezed my hand. "The church is here for both of you during this difficult time." Would Robert be open to counseling? "I believe he's made his choices," I replied, "but I appreciate the offer." As I drove home, I realized something significant had shifted. The isolation Robert had counted on, my reluctance to air dirty laundry, had been broken. The community had witnessed my dignity in the face of betrayal, and in their eyes, I saw not pity, but respect. The law offices of Greenfield Associates offered neutral territory for our meeting. Martha had recommended Charles Greenfield, whose specialty was resolving high-asset divorces with minimal public conflict. The conference room held only 4 people, Robert and his attorney Gerald Hoffman on one side, Charles and me on the other. Robert looked diminished somehow, his usual confident posture replaced with a slight stoop, dark circles under his eyes. Gerald Hoffman shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact with me. "We're here to discuss terms for an equitable separation," Charles began. "Mrs. Hamilton prefers to resolve this matter privately rather than through protracted litigation." "We appreciate that approach," Gerald responded automatically. "Before we begin," Charles continued, "I should note that we've prepared comprehensive documentation of the concerning financial activities and communications that preceded this meeting." He placed a thick folder on the table, including emails discussing strategies to minimize Mrs. Hamilton's settlement by questioning her competence. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "Those were theoretical discussions." "They were instructions to your client," Charles corrected, "which he acted upon by creating a fraudulent marriage challenge as cover for asset transfers." Robert spoke for the first time. "I want to be reasonable about this, Eleanor." I met his gaze steadily. Reasonable would have been an honest conversation after 45 years of marriage. Not manipulation, gaslighting, and attempted financial exploitation. "The good news," Charles interjected, "is that we have an opportunity to resolve this without public filings. that would detail these activities. Mrs. Hamilton is prepared to offer terms. My terms were straightforward. A truly equitable division of assets based on James's professional valuation, restoration of all improperly transferred funds, and clear documentation that contradicted any claims about my mental capacity. Additionally, Charles added, we require written acknowledgement that the marriage challenge was created under false pretenses. That seems excessive, Gerald objected. It's non-negotiable, I said quietly. I won't allow that particular lie to stand. Robert looked at the documents before him, the evidence of his methodical betrayal laid out in black and white. What happens if I don't agree? Then we proceed to formal filing, Charles explained. With all documentation entered into the public record, the unspoken implication hung in the air. Robert's reputation, his business standing, his relationship with his children, all would be irreparably damaged by the full exposure of his actions. "What do you want, Eleanor?" Robert asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I've always wanted," I replied. "Honesty, respect, fair treatment." "I didn't think you'd fight back," he admitted. "That was your mistake." 2 hours later, Robert signed the agreement. Not just the division of assets, but the acknowledgement of how we'd arrived at this point. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated. "For what it's worth, I am sorry it ended this way." "It didn't have to end at all," I replied, "and certainly not like this." 6 months later, I stood in the garden of my new home, a modest but charming cottage near my sister's children in Oak Ridge. The autumn air carried the scent of freshly turned soil as I planted transplants from my original garden, divisions of perennials that had witnessed decades of my life. The cottage represented more than new housing. It was the physical manifestation of my reclaimed independence. Smaller than our family home, but entirely mine, decorated according to my preferences rather than the compromise of a long marriage. My phone rang, Lisa calling about her upcoming visit with the grandchildren. "The guest room is ready," I told her. "Sophie's excited about the art museum." "How are you doing, Mom? Really?" I considered the question as I patted soil around a transplanted hydrangea. "I'm finding my rhythm. Some days are harder than others." "Dad asked about you," Lisa said cautiously. "He wanted to know if you'd be at Thomas's birthday dinner next month." The mention of Robert no longer triggered the sharp pain it once had. "I think it's too soon for social gatherings," I replied. "But someday, perhaps." After we hung up, my new neighbor Emma brought over a welcome basket of garden tools and local honey. At 72, she'd been widowed for a decade and had created a life that inspired me, active in community organizations, taking courses at the local college, hosting weekly gatherings for other independent women. "Those hydrangeas will love the eastern exposure," she observed, examining my plantings. "What are your plans for that sunny corner?" "I'm thinking herbs and vegetables," I replied. "I used to grow them years ago when the children were small." "Perfect. I'm hopeless with vegetables. We could trade. My tomatoes for your basil." As we chatted about garden layouts and local nurseries, I felt a quiet contentment settling over me. Not the happiness I'd once envisioned for this stage of life, but something perhaps more valuable, a hard-won peace built on self-respect and authenticity. Later, speaking with the contractor about built-in bookshelves for the study, I realized how much I enjoyed making decisions without consultation or compromise. Simple pleasures, choosing paint colors, arranging furniture, planning my days, had become exercises in rediscovering my preferences. The betrayal had wounded me deeply, but hadn't destroyed me. In some ways, it had revealed strengths I'd forgotten I possessed. The community center's meeting room was simply furnished, comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, coffee and cookies on a side table, pamphlets about life transitions after 60 stacked nearby. I'd been attending the women's support group for 2 months, initially as a participant seeking connection with others who understood late-life relationship changes. Today, the facilitator had asked me to share my experience. When I discovered my husband's deception, I began, what hurt most wasn't the betrayal itself, but the realization that he believed I wouldn't fight back, that after 45 years, he still didn't truly know me. The dozen women listening nodded in recognition. Some had faced similar situations. Others were dealing with different challenges: widowhood, health crises, family conflicts. The marriage challenge he created taught me something, though not what he intended, I continued. It taught me that trust should be matched with wisdom, that love shouldn't require surrender of self. A younger woman in her 50s, recently separated after her husband's affair, asked hesitantly, "How did you find the courage to stand up to him?" I'm still struggling with that part. I thought about my mother's advice, the small account she'd insisted I maintain. I was fortunate to have my mother's wisdom guiding me, even decades after her passing. She understood that devotion to family shouldn't mean erasure of self. The conversation flowed naturally. Women sharing strategies for rebuilding confidence, establishing boundaries, finding joy in unexpected places. I found myself offering insights from my experience that seemed to resonate deeply with others. As the meeting concluded, the facilitator approached me. "Eleanor, you have a gift for articulating what many struggle to express. Would you consider co-facilitating some sessions? Your perspective would be valuable." The request surprised me. Throughout my life, I'd been defined primarily by my relationships to others: daughter, nurse, wife, mother. The idea of being valued specifically for my wisdom and experience felt both foreign and deeply affirming. "I'd like that," I replied, realizing I meant it. That evening, Sophie called to discuss her college applications. At 17, my granddaughter stood at the threshold of adulthood, facing choices that would shape her life's direction. "Grandma, how do you know if you're making the right decisions?" she asked. "About relationships, career, everything?" "I'm still figuring that out myself," I admitted, "but I've learned that the right decisions honor who you truly are, not just what others expect from you." "Is that why you left Grandpa? Because he didn't honor who you are?" "It's more complicated than that," I said carefully. "But yes, in essence, I realized I deserved respect, honesty, and partnership, not manipulation and betrayal." "I'm glad you taught me that," Sophie said softly, "that I shouldn't accept less than I deserve." In that moment, I recognized that perhaps the most meaningful outcome of my painful journey was this: the wisdom I could now pass to the next generation of women in my family. 1 year after discovering Robert's betrayal, my garden had transformed from freshly turned soil to a flourishing ecosystem. Perennials divided from my original garden bloomed alongside new varieties I'd never tried before. The vegetable beds yielded more than I could use, providing regular exchanges with neighbors. At my garden table sat Martha, reviewing paperwork for the Eleanor Murray Hamilton Foundation, a small but growing organization focused on financial literacy and support for women facing midlife transitions. The 501c3 status should be finalized next month, Martha reported, and the community center has offered free space for the first series of workshops. "It feels surreal," I admitted, pouring iced tea into glasses decorated with hand-painted herbs, a gift from Sophie. "A year ago, I could barely imagine the next day, let alone creating something like this." "Sometimes our greatest contributions emerge from our deepest challenges," Martha observed. The foundation had begun as a simple idea, creating the resource I wished I'd had during my own crisis. It had quickly evolved into something more substantial, attracting volunteers, professional advisors, and community support. My phone chimed with a text from Michael, the first direct communication in several months. "Mom, can we meet for coffee next week? There are some things I'd like to say in person." After reading it to Martha, I set the phone down thoughtfully. Progress comes in unexpected ways. Will you meet with him? Yes, I decided. The Foundation's work is about healing and moving forward. That should include my own family when possible. The mail had brought a letter from Robert, the third since our divorce was finalized. Unlike the previous notes, with their mixture of justification and tentative apology, this one acknowledged the harm he'd caused without excuses. He'd begun therapy, he wrote, confronting patterns of entitlement and control that predated our marriage. I wasn't ready to respond, but I no longer felt anger consuming me when I saw his handwriting. That itself was healing. As Martha departed, promising to finalize the workshop curriculum, I walked through the garden inspecting a new rose variety I'd planted, a vibrant pink climber called New Beginning. Its first buds were forming, promising summer blooms. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, devastated by betrayal, struggling to understand how 45 years of marriage could end in such calculated deception. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something unexpectedly generative: wisdom, purpose, and a deeper understanding of my own resilience. In the garden that evening, I started a journal entry that would later become the Foundation's mission statement. Our greatest strength often lies dormant until circumstances force it to bloom. May we help each other find that strength before crisis demands it, and nurture it together when it emerges through adversity. A marriage challenge did strengthen me, though not in the way Robert intended. In the aftermath of betrayal, I discovered capabilities long submerged beneath the comfortable routines of partnership: resourcefulness, determination, clear-eyed assessment of difficult truths. The grief remains, not just for the marriage lost, but for the one I thought I had. Trust and loyalty are virtues until they become weapons of exploitation. The line between devotion and submission is drawn not by others, but by ourselves, often only after it has been crossed. My mother understood this distinction decades before I needed her wisdom. Now I pass that understanding to my granddaughter, hoping to break the cycle of women who surrender their boundaries in the name of peacekeeping. Commitment requires mutuality, a balanced exchange of respect and honesty that sustains both partners rather than diminishing one for the benefit of the other. The challenge in any relationship lies not in activities or exercises, but in the daily choice to see each other clearly and honor what we see. True partnership demands this mutual witnessing, especially as we age and our needs evolve. My Foundation work now connects me with others navigating similar terrain. Women reclaiming their strength after decades of compromise, rediscovering preferences and passions long set aside. In their stories, I hear echoes of my own, and in sharing mine, I find purpose beyond personal vindication. If you recognize yourself in this story, if you've felt dismissed by those who should value you most, if you've wondered whether maintaining peace is worth the cost of your dignity, know that you're not alone. The wisdom you've earned through years of living deserves respect, beginning with your own. Your boundaries matter, your story matters, and it's never too late to tend the garden of your own life, planting new possibilities alongside the perennials of your experience.